Welcome to On Strike. I'm Bia Lacombe.
And I'm Shama Sawant. Last Saturday, the Democratic Party held its first 2024 presidential primary in South Carolina. Unlike the traditional launch of the presidential primary elections in New Hampshire, the Democratic Party's leadership opted this year to start with South Carolina. Biden's campaign has been beleaguered with low polling numbers for many months, and the party bigwigs had hoped that South Carolina's black voters would give Biden's campaign a real boost. And sure enough, Biden did sweep the primary with 96% of the vote. However, turnout in the primary was at a dismal 4% of registered voters statewide. This showing marked the lowest turnout level for Democrats in the last few presidential primaries. It also took place in the absence of any real primary challengers of consequence and with zero debates. The Democratic elite are pulling out all the stops to try and ensure Biden gets a coronation in the primary. But despite all their efforts, enthusiasm for Biden remains almost non existent at present. On Strike will be exploring many of the questions facing working people in the 2024 election in upcoming episodes, including about the two independent left challengers, Cornel West and Jill Stein. But today we're going to be focusing on Biden's loss of support among black voters, which has been dramatic in a number of polls. Black voters were crucial in Biden's 2020 election, but polls have shown half of black voters wanting a different candidate and growing numbers who either said they wouldn't vote at all or would support Trump.
It's very difficult to get excited because a lot of people kind of subscribe to I'm picking the lesser of two evils.
I just wish that it was another choice.
We want to see things getting done and not just hearing about pro-America, pro-freedom, and pro-democracy.
With the Palestinian-Israel war going on, I think my view personally has shifted on Biden.
It's mass murder every single day.
We don't want a Trump or a Joe Biden.
We're lucky to have with us a special guest, Ryan Watson, who is a tech worker based in Chicago, a worker strike back activist, a rank-and-file member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and a leading member of the Black Caucus of Socialist Alternative. Ryan is going to help us understand what the South Carolina primary results show about black voter consciousness and what black working and young people can and should do to fight for a better world.
But before we get started, I want to talk about the Worker Strike Back membership drive. Become a member now to help ensure Worker Strike Back can continue to organize to rebuild a fighting labor movement, and that On Strike can continue to bring you coverage of a wide range of issues from a working class perspective you won't find on mainstream media. On Strike doesn't run any ads, we don't accept any corporate money, and we rely entirely on donations from working people to support our work.
You're not alone, right? You're not just sitting on your couch, doom scrolling, reading all these different terrible news stories alone, that there are thousands and in reality millions of working class people who feel just as frustrated and also want to see a path forward, who know that higher wages, high quality healthcare, and high quality housing are totally possible.
We're building on the example of the past decade in Seattle on a national scale to widen and strengthen the class struggle. Who here wants to be a part of that movement?
Go to workersstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to this channel. Welcome to On Strike, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that for young people in general, anger about their economic conditions, the failure of the Democrats to pass any progressive measure such as a $15 an hour minimum wage, let alone, Medicare for all, and ending student debt, has been a big reason for disenchantment with Biden and the Democratic establishment. The ending of COVID programs, which had temporarily made a huge dent in poverty, is also a major factor. Can you talk about how these issues have affected Black working class and young people?
Absolutely. So just in general, let's start with like the $15 minimum wage, because that's kind of the largest indicator of like a policy that would have benefited overwhelmingly and disproportionately Black folks, working class Black people. But, one of the early follies of the Biden administration, this thought process that, $15 minimum wage isn't even sufficient in the states that have them in terms of like living conditions, but we don't even have that on a federal level. And he campaigned on that promise.
It's time we had a $15 an hour minimum wage so families can earn a living and get ahead. As president, I'll make sure we get it done.
And that is just one of the key indicators for some of the frustrations that we see, and also alludes to some of the illusions of the role of Trump's history. This idea that we were richer under Trump, and under Biden, we're not as rich. That's a key driving force for many working and upper, working class people who take some of the cuts. The $2,000 stimulus check that happened, and then this was actually probably one of the biggest ones that first faulty. If you win this in Georgia, you're gonna get another $600. That notion, you kind of hear from Southern Black Democrats say that they go to these steps, and working people are saying we've heard the promises and you never met them. There is a 60+% support amongst working people for Black working people for Medicare for all, and there's a demand to make student debt be cheaper, if not free. These demands are not out of the line of sight for many working people, black folks at the front. And so we see kind of no actual major changes. There has probably been elements of cuts here and there. The means testing, essentially what means testing means is that as little people can have it as possible. And yeah, it's not going to make the kind of political dent kind of like a Medicare for all program would look like, or like free public college and universities would have done to benefit the Black working class, and the working class as a whole. And if you couple that with Bidenomics and a history of first fired and last hired, you kind of see an increase of poverty, particularly when you're talking about the ending of those COVID programs that cut across, some of the child poverty levels that existed, and it ended underneath, his time in politics. It's not surprising that 22% of people are, considering Trump, or a wider percentage of people considering just not voting at all, just because they're not enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, Ryan, you talked about how ordinary Black people are feeling right now. I guess the other end of the spectrum is where the Democratic elite are. And so what we've seen is that since the South Carolina primary, prominent Black Democratic Congress member James Clyburn has been in the media downplaying the erosion of Biden support among Black voters, the erosion that you were just talking about, Ryan. When asked whether the primary results confirm a strong standing for Biden among Black voters nationally, Clyburn responded by saying, quote, "I think the answer is emphatic yes," end quote. And by way of evidence, Clyburn proudly pointed to a South Carolina town named Orangeburg, which is a 70% Black town where Biden got his largest percentage, over 97%, in the primary. I wanted to ask you about this, Ryan, because I thought this story perfectly illustrates the profound disconnect of the Democratic Party elite from the working class and the poor, and perhaps most disproportionately from Black working and poor people. Because, in the Orangeburg that Clyburn brags about, over 27% of the population is under the official federal poverty line. And keep in mind, we're talking about the grossly inadequately defined federal poverty line. And this poverty rate happens to be 113.28% higher than the US average. So, Orangeburg is certainly representative of life for many Black people throughout South Carolina. In 2022, 8 of the state's top 10 counties with the highest poverty rates were majority Black, averaging over, again, 27% poverty, which is just insane. But it's also exemplary of many such towns across America where the vast majority of the working class and poor have been ravaged by decades of economic devastation, joblessness, and hopelessness. Can you talk about how all of this is at the heart of the disenchantment with Biden and the Democrats, and how it runs deep in the core of America?
I mean, absolutely. There's this notion that I think has made a level of popularity, particularly amongst the elite, calling like generational wealth, right? Like this notion of like making generational wealth, which is this idea that you're going to build a wealth that your family can kind of be able to benefit from in the event that you pass, right? But I mean, the reality of this is it illuminates generational poverty and generational hopelessness and a quality of life that, capitalism just has always had a role in Black families. The Black working class, it's not new. It didn't happen under Biden alone, although Biden has been around, 52 years of that. You're talking about the creator of mass incarceration, which, I mean, if you want to really draw it out, incarceration is a response to a program that does not have like a welfare system or a safety net for working people who are unemployed and results of crime. That kind of draws that in, and so that anger is really kind of like pushing people out. And I don't think that it's particular to working class Black folks. I mean, I think many working class people are dismayed with the entire system. But when you're talking about an unemployment rate like you have in Orangeburg, where 1 in 4, more than 1 in 4 people have are unemployed or underemployed, are in like very like poverty rates, below poverty rates, which, I mean, I think it's super important to draw out that these poverty rates are like the worst kind of like living, like what is it, like 14,000? So that's like you could barely live on that. And like honestly, I don't know many people who can live on twice that, 3 times that, in terms of quality of life. So 1 in 4 people at a national poverty rate that is determined by the state, not by really like living conditions, really alludes to what, like 1 in 2 or 1 in 3. And like that type of dismay, it's going to lead to hopelessness. It's going to lead to devastation, and it's going to result in the type of crimes that we've seen, particularly in the wake of COVID, where you kind of saw it's a national policy to not care about people. It is an interesting dynamic to really juxtapose James Clyburn showing Orangeburg saying like 97% went out to go vote when the quality of their life is on the constant decline. But we can kind of see this as a continuation of things that we saw under Obama. Like rural America as a whole is just being dismantled. Quality of life is being dismantled. And that is the type of thing that pushed people into, Trump's camp. And that we're seeing that over again. We're seeing 1 in 5 people saying that they potentially could be voting for Trump. And I think that we can't say enough that a Trump alternative is not a real alternative for working people. But I think we can't say what Clyburn's basically making the statement to say that a notion that America is already great. We need a mass overhaul, a radical overhaul that can lead, that can improve the quality of lives of working people, and demands like, Medicare for all, a minimum wage of at minimum, I would say $25, like the demand that Workers Strike Back is putting forth. I think these are going to be the type of things that will actually reignite and get people to a realm where they feel like it's worth fighting for fighting for a political system that works for working class people. And instead of just being like, every man wants for themselves.
You're talking about, this phenomenon of Black voters and a whole layers of workers being really angry with the living conditions under Biden, and how that's pushing some toward Trump. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. In 2020, only 8% of Black voters went for Trump. Now, according to a November poll, and you cited something similar, a November poll from the New York Times and Siena College, 22% of Black voters in 6 battleground states said they would support former President Trump in this year's election, which is the highest percentage a Republican presidential candidate has seen among Black voters in a half century. The same poll showed Biden's support among Black voters going down to 71%, which is a 20-point reduction since 2020. So can you tell us a little bit more about why we're seeing this unprecedented phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched on this. I would argue that we're seeing this. This is the outcome of a bifurcation of our political system, of where people feel like if one doesn't provide an outcome, then you got to go to the alternative. And I think, and we can get into this later, but I think it's kind of the faultiness of having a two-party system where, both parties are capitalist parties. There's that meme that I think is older than memes are of you get kicked in the butt by the Democrats by the left foot, and then you get kicked in the butt by the Republicans by the right foot every 4 to 8 years. And I think we're seeing that phenomenon really kind of take hold, because more and more people are becoming clear that the Democratic Party is not the party for working people. That there has been illusions of that, and I think it's directly related to what we saw from the growth of Black Lives Matter happened, because the highest seat in the world, the presidential seat, was a Black man, and then he took up Wall Street and allowed the working class America, particularly working class, I think 1 in 4 Black households were lost due to the 2007-2009 crash, and that never having a response that actually could have saved those housing. Now we have his vice president in place. We're being told all of 2020 that this is for democracy, that we have to fight, vote for this guy who would not take up the primary demand to use the funds that were usually allocated to police and put that money into actual anti-crime ordinance, like the ones that we saw in Seattle, for example, taxing the rich and putting more money into housing, like with our Amazon tax in Seattle. Those type of policies, if we would have seen anything of that nature on a national scale, because that's a primary demand. Housing is becoming too expensive for majority of people. If you want to take a sentiment that you kind of see amongst many young people, you can kind of tap into some of the more popular artists, musical artists. I don't think music is a good indicator, but when you hear artists say they got Trump stymie check, and you hear the stimulus checks from artists from Chicago like Lil Durk saying that really helped quality of people's lives, and the cutting of child the child poverty in half, and then all of these things are now being the carpet is being pulled from underneath you, all by this so-called working class president, the biggest working class president. It's not hard to see that many Black folks are okay, but how am I benefiting? And the thing that's only saving grace, if you will, is many people are unable to morally vote for Trump. But for those who've already resigned to their own financial benefits, that it's not surprising. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that you're talking about, Ryan, about the dead end of this two-party system that people are faced with, I think that holds a lot of the insight into what's happening with consciousness, especially Black consciousness. And I think the next two of our questions are relating to that. And to begin with, We know it's been 4 years since the launch of the George Floyd protests, historic protest movement, the largest street protest movement in U.S. history. Can you talk about what this movement was able to achieve, and what is the perception about the Black Lives Matter movement among young people in the Black community now, 4 years after the protests?
Yeah, I would say I say like for many working people, because the quality of their life hasn't changed much since 2020, or has become like even worse. Many of them look at the Black Lives Matter as a unsuccessful movement, or maybe even dislike it because of its ties to the Democratic Party and its unwillingness to actually challenge power. I mean, the biggest thing that I would point to is, once again, our successful tax on the top 3% of organizations in Seattle to improve and spend more quality spend more on housing in Seattle. But other than that, we don't really have examples, and that's Seattle, right? Like it's a huge city, but it's not a city that necessarily Black working people are looking at the way that I think that they should, to kind of be able to be like, oh, there was potential for this movement to actually garner wins for Black working people or working people in general. And so, I would say overall, many people just see it as kind of a drop in the bucket, and not as successful as historical civil rights movements. I would say amongst many young people, just 4 years after the protests, many of them don't look at it as examples of like how to change the quality of their life moving forward. I know there's a sentiment of protest doesn't change things. I think it reinforces Black capitalism, because the individual is the only thing that's going to change their lives, because 20 million people were on the streets, the largest protest in the history of this country. And what changed? Nothing. I think for many, Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, does not register as what it had potential to have done. And I think if it would have been tied to a movement that would have challenged the corporate duopoly and created a new party, we'd be in a very different situation today than where we are.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit more about what you just said about how the current situation stems from, I mean, really, what you're pointing to is that it stems from the failures of the left to make win tangible victories out of this historic movement. So would you say, that this also stems from the failures of the labor movement?
Absolutely. I would say it stems from the failures of the left and the labor movement. I think both of them, and their ties to the Democratic Party and not having an independent movement from the Democratic Party, has severely truncated their ability to actually enact the type of change that they propose to be about, right? We have a situation where during Black Lives Matter, you're saying like, the police budget is bloated, that money needs to go elsewhere. And then by August, that's May, by August, you're telling me to go vote for one of the primary creators of the crime bill. Then on the labor side of things, you have a very similar outcome. You're telling me that the guy who broke the strike of the
railroad
workers, is also supposedly the most union friendly president in the history of since FDR. Like these contradictions do not fall flat on people. Like people are not dumb, And I think if posed with a true alternative across the board, if posed with a true alternative, be it Black Lives Matter, be it Roe v. Wade, be it the ceasefire in Gaza, be it labor struggles, to name a few of the most recent ones, if posed with an alternative that actually would benefit working people, I'm not saying that 100% of people would come, but enough people would come to the conclusions of the necessity to join this alternative. And I mean that bipartisan. Independents for sure, but Republicans and Democrats. If you're saying that healthcare should be, should not be a profit-based organization, all those people get sick. So it's just an absolute failure from the left and the labor leadership that we haven't broken from the Democrats on the scale that we need to, and we started to build something really from the ground up that could actually make the type of changes that are necessary that people are starving for, and we can stop jumping from the pot to the kettle.
That's a really important way of describing what people are faced with, which is a lack of options. As you said, it's either the pot or the kettle between the Republicans and Democrats, despite whatever differences there might be between them. And then on the other hand, there are such potentially hugely uniting issues like Medicare for all, like $15 an hour, like, as you said, no matter what your party affiliation, as a working person, you can see joining a movement to win Medicare for all. If there is an option, then people will join it. And appreciated how you mentioned the Amazon tax that we were able to win in Seattle through the leadership of Socialist Alternative and many who are active in the BLM movement here to win this tax on the biggest corporations in order to fund social needs like affordable housing. And as you said, Ryan, that was actually won in the midst of the George Floyd protests here. But that's like unfortunately rare counter example to what was done by most of the NGO leaders, as you talked about, where they were tied at the hip with the Democratic Party and never really managed to present any kind of fighting alternative, any kind of demands where they could actually mobilize all these people who were out on the streets to actually win something. And I think a lot of this is also now tied to what's happening since BLM happened. We've seen the election of a number of Black mayors in many cities, Bruce Harrell here in Seattle, Eric Adams in New York, and in your city, Chicago, it's been Lori Lightfoot followed by Brandon Johnson, both Black mayors. Can you talk about what it's meant for the lives of Black working class and poor people to have these Black mayors be elected? And, and in the wake of the BLM movement, have any of those elections led to any real gains for Black people or for people of color and immigrant communities as a whole?
No, I wouldn't make the argument that it would be. I would say if you want to drive people even more so or alienate people more so out of the political realm, that's what it's provided. But I mean, one thing about Chicago, the Black mayors are new, but we've had Black officials from, all up and down, and there's a notion it's like quality of life hasn't improved. And I think this is directly related to the fact that many of these cities are becoming the playground for the super rich, and it's basically pushing people out. And the true terminology of what gentrification is, which is not a racial dynamic but a class dynamic, and is directly related to the Democratic Party's consistently, doing things that that pushes NAFTA to come to name. On the U.S.-Mexican border. And then at the same time, they refuse to fund the needs of working class and poor people in any cities that exist. So you have a situation where the average person in Chicago, for example, is can barely afford to live here, and they're working 2-3 jobs. And then you have this coming in. And what ends up happening when you have no left alternative is a situation where people feel like they have to compete with people who should otherwise be their allies. Should be equal in their struggle, solidarity in their struggle. And I think like one of the best examples to kind of touch bases, from your election in Seattle is how we won that Amazon tax in Seattle, and how if we had that type of leadership in Chicago that was really saying like, instead of trying to give I think they were trying to give $2 billion to Amazon to have their headquarters here. A $1 trillion company, I think, at the time. Instead of them actually fighting to tax the rich here, in fact, they voted down the head tax here recently that would have amounted to billions of dollars. Instead of taxing our Wall Street, which is the LaSalle Street, which literally tens of trillions of dollars a year come through here untaxed, and really putting that finances into the historical Black and depressed communities, underfunded communities here, immigrant communities as well. I think it's very clear that they kind of ignite these sentiments, these frustrations that then pit these communities against each other. And that's honestly in Chicago, that's, as far as I know, dating back to the 90s, that has always been the sentiment, is pitting community against community. And that doesn't go away with these with the mayors being Black, because ultimately at the end of the day, the same people who were running the city there then, the Dailies, they were Democrats, is the same party that's running the city now, Brandon Johnson being a Democrat. And yeah, I mean, I've heard sentiments of this pushing people to Trump, and that's large in part because of the two-party system and not having a true alternative. And so we need to be clear that Trump is not a true alternative, but the Democratic Party is not going to fight for the type of sentiments that we need. And we need something that's going to say, I'm for working people, no matter if they're Native or not, Black, white, Latinx, or, any woman, man, trans, or cis, or, you name it. I'm for working people, and we're gonna tax the rich to make sure that we can live in a city if we choose to live in that city. And I think that's a sentiment that we're missing on a national scale. And now we've had a Black president, we've had a Black vice president. The Democratic Party is ran by Black men, is what this woman was quoted on MSNBC when she was, making the argument for, how the Democratic Party can win more Black people back to the vote. And it's like, yeah, we got Black faces in high places, but quality of life is still low. And I think it's an argument that could be made, and it could be ran parallel to the 50 years of hip hop. We had all of these celebrations about the 50 years of hip hop, but the people that created the music and why they created it was because of the quality of the life that they lived in. This was the outcome that they were, making music from not having instruments, using what you had available. But now that is a, Jay-Z $1 billion, Grammy award winning, blah, blah, blah person. I like to call them gentrify your own hood hove. You have that, but there's no conversation about the historical role of the political role of hip hop and its advocacy for the communities that it fought, that it came from. And if you want to talk about the failure of the left, the failure of having a true alternative, like what I would have hoped Cornel West's campaign to have been, really putting out an alternative, a justice for all, but like really fighting for that and really putting that a viable alternative. When you see that the third person that's benefiting from the Black faces in high places and mayoral positions and presidential positions is RFK Jr., it's just a testament. People are searching around for alternatives, and many working people. I don't think this is necessarily true for middle class and the successful Black upper class. That's the identities are more important for them because they seem directly accessible. But for working people, they see those identities have not benefited them. And so they're looking for an alternative, and then looking for that alternative to produce the type of upper mobility that the American dream, so-called, has been a proponent for. So that dream has never been realizable for Black working people as in mass, and a growing number of working people in general.
You were mentioning Cornel West's Justice for All party that he and his campaign are launching, and I think it's important that you note that, because while it is, in a certain sense, a positive development of, launching this independent party, and Cornel West himself, his independence from the Democrats is very important, but it's being framed by the campaign in this very narrow, limited way as just a way to get ballot access for the election. And at the same time, the campaign hasn't been building the kind of momentum and mass public support that there absolutely is. All the things you're talking about, Ryan, it's the huge opening that there is for the kind of working class politics and a genuine alternative to the Democrats and Republicans that working people, young people, Black working people especially want. But that campaign the Cornel West campaign hasn't been fully capitalizing on this massive opportunity that there is. And so, I think the disappointment is pretty palpable and understandable. And so, I think that kind of, leads into this question of what is the choice for working class people, and for most, like the majority, right, don't vote at all. And so I think that's something that a lot of working class people are looking at in terms of 2024. But so I think I probably know the answer to this question. But do you support Biden, Ryan? Do you think working class Black people should support Biden, or if not, who should they support?
Short answer is no. But I've also not. Outside of Bernie Sanders, I've not voted for a Democrat since 2010. And that sentiment is large in part because the Democratic Party has not been fighting for Black working people for as long as maybe here and there's people here and there, but for as long as I've been paying political attention, I've not seen that. And so, I definitely I will not be holding my nose for Biden. I'm sympathetic to people who feel like they might need to, but I don't think that that's the role in the next stage for us to do. I think Cornel West is still the best alternative because I think what he did do, if we want to tie it into Bernie, is he broke away from the Democratic Party, which was like the failure of 2016 for me. I voted for Bernie in the primary, but I think we should have seen a breakaway of the Democratic Party. So kudos to Cornel West for seeing that. But I think some of the lessons that Bernie did properly, he didn't take with him. And I think that sentiment would have been really honing in on those policies that, like we've stated already, Medicare for all. That would have been key. And I think that what we're seeing now with the abandoned Biden from the Muslim community, already I've heard the Democratic Party planning a strategy to how do we struggle and win without this community, the Muslim community. And that's, I think, a testament to just how much they view, these different voting blocks as just that, voting blocks. Like, hey, we'll give you something during election year, but then after that, we don't really care. And I think Cornel West has a historical anti-war sentiment, standing with working people in Palestine and in Israel. I think policies that would benefit migrants and also native-born Americans, I think that would have been a great basis to build this party, even if it was on the basis that it was going to build the foundation for a new party. I think that would have been key. But I think I want to register my anger to the two corporate parties, and so I'm going to be voting for Cornel West. But really, the day after, I'm going to be still fighting for a new party and doing everything in my power to ensure that the movements, the labor movement, social movements that's coming down the pipeline, are pointing in a direction that is a break from the Democrats and the Republicans and for a working class party.
Right. And all of this also then connects to perhaps the most important thing that we should be talking about. And you know, we need to cover this in many upcoming episodes. But just very quickly in closing, in this dire situation of economic inequality, of just complete frustration on every front for ordinary people's lives, what should working people do, and Black working people especially, do to fight back and win real gains? And obviously, I know that this really could be the whole show. But if you can talk about this in brief, about what lessons do you think we can learn from the civil rights movement? What lessons can be learned from the history of the American labor movement, especially as it relates to Black union members?
Yeah, this is a huge question, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. I mean, I think the Black working class needs to draw out the historical role of why have our lives changed and improved over the last 150 years. And in those instances, you would see multiracial movements for class demands that are fighting for working people being the most successful changes in our lives. You have the 19th century farmers movement, where Black farmers and white farmers came together, and there was definitely gains there. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party was able to convince large sections to kind of break away from them, but still learning the lessons of that period, the 1930s and 1940s labor struggles, the creation of the CIO as a break from the AFL before they rejoined. That we saw massive improvement in quality of life. The A. Philip Randolphs of yesteryear, who took 12 years of organizing the on the trains to make huge successes, also turning down $1 million offer, his own personal wealth, because he knew that the movement needed to fight and everybody needed to win, and it wasn't just about him. That is historical struggles that we need to kind of touch on. And like, we're seeing labor struggles on the rise, and I think that benefits Black folks, but I think we need to tie that in to not just unionize Black working people, but working people as a whole. If the UAW would have been in a stronger position to fight for that 4-day work week, that would have been beneficial for the underemployed and the unemployed, because they would have had to employ more people to compensate. And also, those type of quality paying jobs would have been expansive. And then the sheer amount of benefit, if you want to talk about material benefit, a 4-day work week would have been, I know I would have been happy about it. And everybody I talked to, literally everybody I talked to, would benefit from that. So I think that we need to have actual real demands, like a 4-day work week, like $25 minimum wage, like healthcare, like housing, and like with real numbers, rent control, nothing over the cost of living increase on rent control. These type of demands will energize and push people to make it worthy for us to struggle. And actually winning them, really winning them, would bring layers and layers of more people in. And it'll also appeal to people to see that actually collective action is the route to improve our lives, and not buying into the dog eat dog and standing on the necks of our fellow workers, be they Black or white. Yeah, I think we can expand on that for a whole show, but I think that's the sentiment I would be able to kind of draw it on.
Yeah, I think that all of those points are really crucial, and there's so many historical lessons that we can learn from the labor movement, from the history of social struggle. And I think what that's pointing us to, and what you've already talked about several times today, Ryan, is the need for a new working class party where we have elected representatives who are actually accountable to us as working people, who are accountable to our movements, and who are willing to directly confront and challenge the Democrats and the Republicans and fight for what we need and champion those strong, bold demands that you're talking about. And so, yeah, I think that that's a huge part of what we're doing with Workers Strike Back. And so I know, Ryan, you would agree with, putting out a call for anyone who's watching this who feels really frustrated about the upcoming election and wants to, get involved in something tangible. Look for Workers Strike Back in your area. Go to workersstrikeback.org and, become a member. And we're in, I think, having meetings in a whole number of cities across the U.S. And so you can, talk with people who, like you, are very frustrated with the status quo of things and want to fight back for a different kind of society. So, just really want to thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and if you're watching this show and you want to talk more with Ryan, you should go contact Workers Strike Back and see if you can attend meetings in Chicago where Ryan is based.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, don't forget to hit like on this video and subscribe to this channel. On Strike is a production of Workers Strike Back, a nationwide organization fighting on working class demands like a $25 an hour minimum wage, union jobs, Medicare for all, and against discrimination and oppression. Workers Strike Back is also calling for a new party for working people because neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party represents us. Find out more at workersstrikeback.org and donate. And look for us on Patreon to support our work. On Strike is a broadcast entirely for working people and funded entirely by working people. Solidarity.